Hey guys, so today I am driving the 2020 Chevrolet Bolt. That's Bolt with a B. Now about 4 years ago, Chevrolet showed this car to the world and it was some pretty high-tech stuff. It was one of the first electric cars with over 200 miles of range that didn't cost an arm and a leg like most Tesla vehicles. Now unfortunately for Chevrolet, it was also saddled with some rather questionable styling that made some people think GM should kill it with fire. Now today, I'm in the refreshed 2020 Bolt. It's been upgraded with a slightly larger battery pack, so the range goes from 238 to 259 miles. You still have room for 5 people and all of their stuff because this is a small hatchback, and you get decent performance, 0 to 60 in around 6.5 seconds. Now, the one cool thing about owning an electric car is being able to basically drive this around town to and from work, and whenever you get home, you can plug it in like a lot of your other electronic goodies. I'm talking about your cell phone, I'm talking about your iPad, I'm talking about your video game console. So if you're one of the many Americans that have a garage with a charge port in it, it's as simple as pulling up to your driveway, parking the car, getting out, finding the charge port, and of course, plugging it in. What is that? Oh, gross. No. Send it back to GM, kill it with fire. I'm done. So there's a key word that I want you to remember here, and that's affordability. At around $36,000 when this car came out 3 years ago, it was one of the very first affordable long-range EVs that you could buy in America or across the globe. Because remember, the Model S was the one that introduced, 200 plus mile range in the beginning, but this was a car that was $80,000+, approaching $100,000. It was just ridiculously expensive, out of reach for most people. So the Chevrolet Bolt, with its 238 mile range back then, was a big deal because you could get this car for, $40,000 before the federal tax credit, which, by the way, the tax credit has expired. So if you're looking to buy one of these, Chevy or GM has sold past the 200,000 unit threshold. So you're not going to be able to get that. But thankfully, Chevy dealers are putting a hefty incentive on this car. So I've seen them be taking off around, $10,000 off the sticker price. Now, besides its long range, one of the other things that made the Bolt super appealing, especially to enthusiasts, because in the past, electric cars were just boring, overgrown golf carts. I mean, a Nissan Leaf did 0 to 60 in around 10 seconds. That was just paltry numbers for an EV. But nowadays, even this little minivan looking like Chevy electric car will hit 60 in 6.2 seconds. So you might be wondering, what the heck is powering this thing? Well, let's take a look at that. Now, underneath the hood of the Chevrolet Bolt, those of you looking to find a frunk like a Tesla, you're going to be disappointed because instead of a frunk, you're going to find a lot of orange cables, an electric motor underneath here, because the Bolt has a more conventional chassis layout in terms of where the batteries are stored and of course where the motor sits on this car. Now, in terms of the output, what's powering this thing? It's front wheel drive only, and you're gonna find roughly around 200 horsepower and 266 pound-feet of torque. That's actually very good numbers, and back then, this was one of the top in the class in terms of power. A lot of other electric cars roughly had half the horsepower that this had back in 2017. Now, General Motors did enlarge the battery pack for 2020. It went from 60 kilowatt hours to 66 kilowatt hours, and they also adjusted the chemistry, which means it gets 259 miles of range as opposed to 238. 259 is actually the most in the segment if you're going to compare it to things like the Hyundai Kona electric, the Kia Niro electric, the Nissan Leaf Plus, and of course the Tesla Model 3, the standard range plus model. If you go to the long range Tesla, that offers more range than this. Now, in terms of acceleration, it all goes out through a 1-speed reduction gear, and General Motors says you'll get to 60 in around 6.5 seconds. I've seen it as quick as 6.2, so this is actually pretty good performance. As the Bolt sits, it weighs around 3,500 pounds, so it is a heavy vehicle, but you should note that a lot of its competition is roughly 500 pounds heavier versus the Chevrolet Bolt. Now, in terms of charging, that's always really important for an EV. If you guys plug this thing on a standard 120 outlet, that's the one that's in your house, it's gonna take over 30 hours to charge and plug in. So that's really only something you should do in emergencies. It's known as a trickle charge. Those of you who have a level 2 charger at your home, that's the one that your dryer hooks up to. It's a 240. It'll roughly charge at the rate between 20 to 30 miles an hour, which means you could charge up the Bolt in roughly around 10 hours, so overnight. GM also offers a fast charge option for $750. That'll charge at 50 kilowatts, or you'll be able to put about 150 miles in the battery in about 30 minutes. That's the option that you'll do if you're on long trips, and that's the one that companies like Electrify America have been building up across the US, so you can actually take long road trips in the Chevrolet Bolt. Now, of course, all the technical stuff is important to know, but driving it is probably even more important, so let's get back to the driving. Yes, so the Chevrolet Bolt has around 200 horsepower, which is great. But I will say that the power does start to run a little bit dry when you're at highway speeds trying to pass this thing or pass somebody on the highway. I mean, you put your foot down and it still accelerates reasonably well. But those of you who are used to driving, your Teslas and whatnot, your performance Teslas, even the non-performance ones, they do feel like they have a little bit more steam. This car is definitely not slow by any means, and the fact that it has no gears, the power is just kind of instantaneous. You put your foot down, it just surges forward very quickly. There's no lag, there's no delay. The noise levels in here are also not bad. I am noticing there is a little bit more wind noise than I'd like in this car. I'm guessing the very tall profile of this thing is probably not helping the aerodynamics, although GM does say that the coefficient of drag in this car is around 0.30, which is not bad, but there are competitors that are a little bit more slippery when they go through the wind. Visibility in here is also okay. The view out of the front is weird because it's got this really long dashboard, so it makes it feel like I'm sitting basically in the back seat. The view out of the back with that rear view camera mirror is very nice. Put it into a regular mode here, and the back window is actually a pretty decent size. Front seat comfort in this car also, I mentioned that I hate the seats. I still hate the seats even after spending a few days in driving this thing. It's not soft enough for me. They don't really have enough bolstering. They feel really flat and they feel really hard. I don't like the seats at all. They really just need to redo the seats. The back seat in this car actually looks pretty big. Let's show you guys what the back seat space is like. So I'm confused because the back seat of the Chevrolet Bolt is actually a little bit more comfortable versus the front. There's plenty of legroom here. Chevy says you get around 36.5 inches and a completely flat floor. You have 2 USB ports, no vents back here, but you do have one level heated seats. The seat bench itself just has a lot more squishy padding. What the hell, Chevy? What were you thinking with these thinly padded front seats? I don't understand. But just like the front seats, there's a lot of cheap, hard, scratchy black plastic back here. But at least the seats are more comfortable. So if I were gonna sit a long period of time in this car, I'd rather be in the back. So yeah, I don't understand why GM would put more cushier padding seats in the back seat of this car, and you actually have surprisingly decent legroom back there. So for a family car, the Bolt is pretty usable, if you guys plan to actually use the back seat in this thing. Driver assistance wise, it's got automatic emergency braking with pedestrian detection. It's got lane keep assist, lane departure alert. You should know that it's part of a driver confidence package for $500. And if you guys are looking for adaptive cruise control in this thing, it is solely just unavailable, which I don't understand why. Are there any ants in here? Ah! So now that I've rid myself of the ants in here, let's talk about the interior of the Chevrolet Bolt. Now, first things first, that door slam doesn't sound relatively solid to me. It sounds a little bit tinny. The rest of this interior has a pretty interesting design. I actually think the design is rather cool looking. You've got all these different textures and colors in here. You've got a big LCD screen here. You've got an LCD screen over there. Unfortunately, when you start touching things, that's where stuff starts to go a bit wrong because, yeah, there's a lot of cheap, scratchy plastic in here. And it kind of reminds you that Chevrolet spent the big bucks on the battery and the electric motors because everything in here feels a little bit like an economy subcompact car. Even the seats in this thing, they have a very interesting two-tone design to them. I actually really like how it has some dark gray with the light gray with the orange stitching. But upon closer inspection of the seat, They are very flat, they are very narrow, and if you guys are of wider frame or of heavier set, you're gonna find these seats extremely uncomfortable. In fact, I'm not very fat, I'm just kind of average size, and I don't even fit in these seats very well. I slide around a lot because this is really narrow. The padding is also super thin. Like typically seats have a lot of extra cushioning, but this just goes straight to the hard portion here. So I think that Chevy really dropped the ball with the seats on this thing. It almost makes the car undrivable for me. So try the seats out before you actually decide on the Bolt. The rest of this interior has some pretty cool textures, but there's so many different intersecting lines and plastics and different trim in here that some of it I'm noticing doesn't fit all that properly. There's also some rather jagged edges that you'll find over here on the door panels. There's also some rather sharp edges in addition to the hard touch plastic. The only thing that's really soft where my elbows touch is right here on the center console. It's slightly padded and it doesn't have the same orange stitching that you find on the seat. So I would have liked to see a little bit more consistency there. Now the car's on right now, but remember it's an all electric car, so there's no really engine noise or anything like that. The steering wheel, it's the same steering wheel that you find in something like a Chevrolet Malibu, which is a rather traditional 3-spoke design. The wheel itself is tilt and telescoping, which is good because cars like the Nissan Leaf do not offer a telescoping wheel. So getting comfortable in here, or at least a decent driving position, is okay. The seats are manual adjustable. You can basically adjust them 6 different ways with manual style controls. And then they offer 3-level heat seats in the front. There's also heated seats in the back and a heated steering wheel. But if you're looking for cooled seats, the Bolt does not offer it. The Bolt also doesn't offer a sunroof in this vehicle, which is a little bit of a strange omission. Now, in terms of the center stack here, I do like the large 8-inch touchscreen display over here. It does include things like Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, as you can see. The display itself, go to the energy flow here, energy display, has some pretty cool graphics that you can see. You can see things like your charging whenever you have it plugged in. It'll show things like information on how quickly it's charging, how much energy you're using, what's actually draining the power. These are all very helpful pieces of information. Chevy also made some updates this year to the 360 camera. It's now got a higher resolution display, which is definitely nice. But what the odd thing is, for some reason, my tester's rear backup camera isn't working. Now, obviously, that camera is not working because the door is open. That's where my cameraman is filming for you guys. But I found that my tester, the backup camera, just wasn't working ever since they delivered the car. I don't know particularly why that is, but I'll take GM's word for it that they did upgrade the resolution. The rest of the cameras do look pretty good. The home screen over here on the infotainment system, you can see, is a little bit different than the MyLink that you find in some of the other Chevrolet products. I imagine that this will probably be updated because GM is planning to make some significant changes to the Bolt for 2021. They may even upgrade the battery even more. This screen here is pretty good, but I don't particularly think the graphics look very impressive, especially when you look at some of the competition. I do like the size of the screen, and overall it's functional and easy to use, although there were times where I'm noticing the screen itself was rather slow to activate. You only get a single zone climate control over here. And then I don't understand why there's a lot of empty buttons here. For something that's a fully loaded trim, I expected this to be completely full of all the features. My guess is this goes in the European market cars, which has some additional features. There's also some pretty big storage down here, although the storage is not the most accessible. And if you throw stuff in here, it's just kind of slide around because it doesn't have any kind of non-slip surface down there. You have 2 cup holders over here. Your shifters over here for the 1-speed direct drive transmission. It has that interesting function where you push this little side button here, kick it over to the left to go to reverse, and then pull it all the way back to go to drive. L is for the regenerative braking, which is again very important when we're talking about electric cars. There's 2 USB ports over there and then a wireless phone charger. So this interior has some pretty nice tech in it, has an interesting design. Unfortunately, the seats are a miss for me and the cheap materials are a miss for me, but it's somewhere that GM had to cut costs because they put all the money into the battery and the powertrain. The interior is pretty straightforward and easy to use, and I should also mention that earlier I had said the car only had an 8-inch display. Really, it's a 10.2-inch display, so those extra 2.2 inches make a big difference, if you know what I mean. Really driving around the Chevrolet Bolt, this makes me not want to compare it to a Tesla because it doesn't feel like it's in the same league as a Tesla. I mean, sure, they're both all electric. Sure, they offer, long range, and this car, is MSRP wise comparable to a Tesla, but it's going to be far less expensive with the dealer incentives and the rebates. It's just easier to get a Bolt as well because dealers actually have them in stock. I want to compare this more favorably to a Hyundai Kona EV, the Kia Niro EV, the Nissan Leaf Plus. When you compare it to those vehicles, the Bolt feels like it's slightly more fun to drive. I feel like this is a little bit quicker than all of them because Chevy actually lets you experience the full 266 pound-feet of torque, whereas Hyundai and Kia will limit you in the very first 30 miles an hour where they're limiting the torque. The Nissan Leaf is quicker now with the Plus version, but it only offers 215 miles of range on the SL and SV version, and it just doesn't feel as quick as the Chevy Bolt. The steering in this car also is surprisingly agile. It's no hot hatch for sure. The car feels kind of top heavy, but the Bolt is probably the most fun to drive out of the three competitors that I had mentioned. It's just weird to me that, out of all the long-range EVs, Honda and Toyota don't have anything in this segment. VW will offer something soon, but it's not coming until the end of this year or early next year, at least in America. I just can't get past the awful looks of the Bolt, and I know the looks are subjective. Some of you may think that the Bolt is a rather handsome car, and that is perfectly fine. If you think it's a handsome car, that is great. But as I mentioned earlier, tall and narrow does not work in America. We do not like that way that styling element looks because it reminds you a lot of a small van. It's why cars like the Mazda MPV and 5 didn't work. It's why cars like the Toyota Prius V or the C-Max didn't work. We just don't like the shape of that car, and that's exactly what the Bolt reminds me of. Literally, I remember when GM first showed this car off in 2016, a lot of people gasped because they were literally like, what was Chevy thinking? They've got this great technology, this great powertrain, and they've put a body over it that makes you want to kill it with fire, just like those ants. So obviously ants in the charge port, that doesn't come standard on this car, but I've done a Google search here, and apparently ants really like warm, dark places. So a charge cord that's on the ground going up to this, of course you're gonna find ants crawling in there. So my recommendation, if you have one of these or any EV and you park it outside, make sure you have some ant killer on hand. But enough about those ants. Let's talk about the design of the Chevrolet Bolt, because when this car was first shown about 4 years ago, a lot of people said they should kill it with fire in terms of the design. And I actually think they said that for one reason. And that's because if you look at the silhouette of the Bolt, it's very tall and very narrow. That's a design language that doesn't really work here in America. It may work in other parts of the world, but we don't like things that look like a small minivan. In fact, parts of the silhouette of this car reminds me a lot of the Mazda 5 or a Ford C-Max, and you guys know those cars are no longer available in the States. Now, of course, this design feature or this silhouette makes the Bolt very roomy on the inside, which is probably why Chevrolet did it. But at the same time, you have to ask yourself, for the people who call Tesla a really ugly vehicle, I know styling is subjective, but I'm kind of looking at this and think to myself, there are certain parts of the Bolt that look okay and other parts where I'm just like, what in the world were they thinking? So with the rest of the front fascia, you can see bi-xenon headlights are standard on all the trim levels. But the one thing I'm noticing, you do have LED daytime running lights, but there's no LED turn signals, there's no fog lights. In fact, some of you may be wondering, why does it matter that GM doesn't put all LEDs on this car? Well, LEDs, they're brighter, they're lower energy consumption, and they last longer. And for an electric car, an all-electric car that's supposed to innovate here, I just think it's a very much a missed opportunity for Chevrolet. So for a car that has a really ugly silhouette, I actually think that Chevrolet put some rather decent looking wheels on this thing. 17s are gonna be standard riding on 215 50 series tires. The Premier kind of gives you these machine gray painted pockets, which actually make the wheels pop a little bit more. I think Chevy actually put a really good looking wheel on this car, which is a good thing because the rest of the body just looks very odd. Now, if you're one of those people who isn't very good at parking big cars or driving big cars, you're gonna appreciate the small proportions of the Bolt, because as you can see, it's 164 inches long, which makes it about 10 inches shorter than something like a Nissan Leaf. This is about the same length as the Hyundai Kona EV. And if you're gonna compare it to the Tesla Model 3, because if you're gonna be talking about electric cars, you can't forget about Tesla, it's roughly 20 inches shorter than that. Now at the back of the Bolt, I almost feel like I'm seeing this awkward smile. The taillights here are kind of the eyes, and then there's this weird awkward smile that runs along the entire rear of the vehicle that goes up here. I think it's one of the reasons why I think the Bolt is just an incredibly weird looking car from most angles, but at the back, it's probably the weirdest looking part of the car. Thankfully, there are some LEDs for the taillights over here, but the turn signals are incandescent, and then down here on the tag lights, they're incandescent. Obviously, there are no visible exhaust tips on a car like this. This is all electric, so it kind of will shout to you that you are driving an efficient car, but it has a frumpiness to it that the first generation Nissan Leaf had, which I don't particularly like. Now, cargo capacity, Chevrolet says you get around 17 cubic feet of space with the seats up. That's actually pretty small. Something like the Nissan Leaf or the Hyundai Kona offers a little bit more space because remember, the Bolt is a pretty small car. Fold down those seats, you get around 56 cubic feet of space. That's actually a pretty good amount of space. Now, like a lot of other EVs, you do have a very generous underfloor storage over here, which actually comes with nearly 2 levels. This is where you can kind of charge or store the mobile charger that the car comes with. But overall, if you guys are looking for cargo capacity, because the Bolt is a hatchback, it does offer a good amount, but only if you fold down those seats. But again, looks are always subjective. I apologize for those of you who actually like the way this car looks. Let's talk a little bit about the range, because this car offers 259 miles of range now, which is a pretty good number. It's actually the most range that you're going to find in the segment if you not count the Model 3 long range, which is around $50,000. It's considerably more expensive than this car. In my week's worth of testing, I actually did match the EPA's range, which is very good considering the fact that Teslas, I had one for a year and a half, they tend to have a number that's very optimistic when you look at the Trip Computer's numbers. Other brands tend to be a little bit more conservative with their estimates. So this car actually has good range. What I don't like about this car is the travel charger, the mobile charger that it comes with. It does not come with a level 2 adapter where you can basically swap out the plug from the 110 to the 240 and use the mobile charger. Chevy basically wants you to have the level 2 charger installed on your wall as opposed to just having the outlet. So I think that Chevy needs to fix that, because a lot of other competitors like the Nissan Leaf, the Audi e-tron, Teslas, they give you an adapter where you can take out the 110 plug and replace it with a 240 plug. So that's something that Chevy definitely needs to do. From a dead start, even with the traction control turned off, I'm impressed that this car actually didn't have any wheel spin there. You can induce some wheel spin in this car relatively easily if you're basically putting your foot down around corners or if you're on a wet surface. But it does a pretty good job of putting the power down, because remember, this is a front-wheel drive architecture. It shares some underpinnings with some economy compact cars, and that's what you notice, you know, around this car as you drive it, compared to a rear drive architecture that a Tesla has or some of the luxury brands. But the Bolt is a surprisingly nice driving car that really shocked me. I wasn't expecting it to drive as nice as it does, so I can see why people went crazy for this car about 4 years ago when it first came out. But 4 years later, there's a 2021 Bolt that's on the horizon, and while we don't have any detailed specifics on the changes just yet, I'm hoping for quite a few things. I'm hoping for improvement in the driver assistance, so obviously adaptive cruise control would be nice. I would like to see much better front seats, which are just better padded and they're more comfortable. A nicer interior. I would like to see them improve the range even further, you know, get past that 300-mile mark. GM is working on a new type of battery technology that they will be sharing the tech with Honda, actually. So there's a lot of good things coming for GM. They are embracing the full EV part. And it's just a matter of time before we start seeing them start to trickle out in the next year or so.
What are you doing?
Just trying to kill the rest of these ants.
Is that even an ant killer?
No, it's bug repellent, but I like the way it smells.
All right, can we finish this video?
Okay, fine. So the Chevrolet Bolt was one of the first EVs to actually come to market that had over 200 miles of range that didn't cost $80,000 the way a Tesla Model S cost. And it also beat the Tesla Model 3 to market about a year prior, because remember, this has been on sale since the end of 2016. Now, this is my first time actually spending some time driving the Bolt. How does this thing stack up to the rest of the segment? I have to say, the Bolt is still a really enticing choice if you guys are looking for a full electric daily driver, because as you guys saw, it's still really fast when you put your foot down. It still has plenty of space on the inside and the back seat. The trunk's also decent when you have those seats folded down. And once you get past the looks of this car, but remember, looks are always subjective. I'm not the biggest fan of the styling of this car. I think that cars like the Kia Niro EV, the Hyundai Kona EV, and even the Nissan Leaf, the new one, looks better than the Chevrolet Bolt. This is a really enticing proposition, especially when you look at the numbers, because this car starts at around $36,000 for the base version. Now, of course, that's before you add in any of the incentives that you may qualify for the states. Unfortunately, the $7,500 tax credit on the Bolt expired a couple of months ago because GM hit that 200,000 sales mark threshold that you have here in America. This particular one here that I'm showing you is the fully loaded Premier. It stickers for a little over $44,000 when you add features like the driver assistance or driver confidence package and the quick charging. Now, of course, the Bolt still isn't perfect. Those seats are horrible. I just find them extremely uncomfortable. And for a car that has so much tech in it, the fact that it's missing adaptive cruise control, I think is an inexcusable omission. And GM seriously needs to fix that. Even after 4 years, they haven't. Now, keep in mind, there is a completely refreshed Bolt coming for the 2021 model year, but we don't have any specifics on what it's going to entail. We're hoping that GM will redesign the seats. We're hoping that they'll add features like adaptive cruise control. They may also even put in their new battery pack, which would improve the range and performance of this car even more. But really, when you start adding in all of this car for what it has to offer now, at $44,000, I've been seeing Chevy put around an $8,500 rebate on this car. When you add in the dealer discounts, I'm seeing dealers in my local area charge around $30,000 for a car as fully loaded as this. So we're talking a car that's $44,000 in the sticker and you paying around low $30,000. It makes this thing a really enticing proposition, and it's less expensive versus cars like the Tesla Model 3 and the Nissan Leaf, the Hyundai Kona EV, and the Kia Niro. So with all that said, if you guys are looking to find one of the longest range EVs at the most affordable price and you don't mind the styling of this thing, I think the Bolt is still worth a look. But for those of you who want an electric car that is simply just more fashionable, that makes more of a statement, that has better driving dynamics, a nicer interior, you may also want to consider some of the Bolt's main competition. But with all that said, I hope you guys have enjoyed my full overview on this 2020 Chevrolet Bolt. If you're also looking to see the latest cars I'm testing, be sure to follow me on Instagram at redline_reviews, like us on Facebook, and as always, guys, please keep subscribing to the Redline Reviews YouTube channel for all the latest reviews. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you all in the next video.